My name is Ethan Carter. If you've ever been called useless by the person you love right in front of a crowd, if you've stood in a room you helped build only to hear your wife plan to fire you in front of her parents, then you might understand how it felt when I opened an email not meant for me and realized my wife's entire family had erased me from their future. But what they didn't know was that my grandfather had written me into something far more permanent. And when I finally sat in the chair they wanted to erase me from, I didn't speak first. I spoke last.
Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the latest video.
I stood just outside the spotlight, close enough to feel its heat, far enough to pretend I didn't care about the darkness. That's how I've always lived. The silent husband in the Bennett family. I pretended, I worked, I kept myself useful, until they decided even that wasn't enough. Today was Nexlify Technologies' quarterly meeting at the Seattle headquarters. The meeting room was flooded with light from large glass windows overlooking Puget Sound. A long glass table, black leather chairs, dozens of employees packed in. Someone leaned against the wall, coffee cup tilted in hand. I'd spent the whole weekend perfecting the strategy report, clean charts, simple language, clear data, no flash, just right. My part came after Claire's speech. She stood at the head of the table, wearing a navy blazer unchanged since 2002, reading revenue like scripture. Harold and Margaret, Claire's parents, sat on either side, nodding like they were cheering. I waited on the left wing, laptop open, quiet as always. Then Claire paused mid-sentence, squinting at me. "Ethan," she called, her smile more sharp than warm. "You're up next, right?" I stepped forward, nodded, fingers brushing the laptop keys. "Yes, I'm ready," I said softly. But she raised a hand, smirked, and said loudly, "Let's hope it's not another special PowerPoint. He's not a numbers guy, folks, but he prints slides real pretty." Her words crashed like glass shattering on linoleum. No one laughed. No one moved. The air choked, only my heart beat pounding. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I scanned the room, searching for a sympathetic glance, a hint of objection. But Harold bit into a biscotti, lips curling like he'd won a bet. Margaret raised an eyebrow, looked away. Employees bowed their heads, pretending to read papers. The silence didn't scream. It swallowed me. I stepped back, laptop still open, charts glowing pointlessly on the screen. Claire went on, as if I'd never existed. Harold talked revenue. The meeting moved forward. I left the room, walked down the stone-tiled hallway, my shoes echoing dryly. Colleagues passed, avoiding my eyes, a few nodding awkwardly. My shoes felt heavier, like they were lined with lead. I entered my private office, closed the door gently, not wanting anyone to hear. The small room, shelves stuffed with files, old wooden desk, was the opposite of Claire's lavish office, with its leather sofa and abstract art. I sat down. I've never cried at work, except once in 2009, when an intern saw my red eyes, after a failure, and spread that I was weak. Since then, I've locked my emotions tight, especially here, where I'm the son-in-law, an outsider in the Bennett's eyes. I opened my laptop, stared at the blank screen, trying to find my breath. Claire's words echoed, "Not a numbers guy. Print slides pretty." From the woman I once loved, who stayed up late with me, building Nexlify's first campaign. I remember joining the company after marrying Claire, thinking I'd prove my worth, become part of the Bennett empire. But from dinners in Bellevue, where I washed dishes while Claire was praised, to projects I worked on but she got awards for, I realized I was just a tool. Today Claire's words were a declaration, a knife to the self-respect I'd built over 47 years. I looked out the window, Puget Sound misty. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I wouldn't collapse in front of them. Not because I'm strong, but because I've learned to lock my emotions in this place, where I'm always the outsider in the Bennett's eyes. I meant to check the strategy report, hoping work would pull me from the emotional quagmire. But an unread email popped up, forwarded from Claire's account. It must have slipped past her filter, a rare mistake. Subject: Ethan's role transition plan. My stomach didn't sink. It just froze, like my body knew something awful was coming. I clicked, though part of me wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen. The email was a thread between Claire, Harold, and Margaret. Their tone was light, efficient, like discussing a party menu. Claire wrote, Best to let Ethan go quietly. We can call it a chance for him to find new growth. He'll cry for a few days, and move on. Harold replied, needs to happen before he asks questions. Silence is best. And from Margaret, one line, agreed. With a smiley face emoji. I stared at that tiny yellow symbol, maybe minutes, maybe longer. It hurt more than any curse. It was the period on their plan to erase me. The funny thing is, I didn't see I was being sidelined. Betrayal happened slowly, step by step, until it explodes. I leaned back, looked at the ceiling, gray squares now mocking my naivety. They didn't send this email to me by accident. Not quite. It was a declaration, a conclusion they thought I wouldn't dare challenge. To them I wasn't a fighter, just the guy who followed orders, printed slides, worked weekends without complaint. I clicked the email shut, sat still, so long it felt like time stopped. I thought of opportunities I'd turned down. Job offers from other Seattle companies. Christmas Eves I spent at the office, while Claire flew to Hawaii with friends. I recalled rewriting a strategy proposal during Thanksgiving dinner, just because Harold forgot his main point. I remembered Margaret's look, whenever I spoke in meetings, like she wanted me to hurry and sit. And now, they planned to fire me. Quietly, because they thought I wouldn't make a fuss. Because they thought I was just a convenience. Nothing more. I thought of Claire, our early days in love, when she smiled at me in a small cafe near Puget Sound, when we built Nexlify's first campaign together. But the Bennett's pressure changed her, or maybe revealed her true self. The awards she won, with my name scrubbed from reports, weren't accidents. They'd planned this for years, and I was too blind to see. I could confront now, storm Claire's office, demand answers. But I didn't. Not because I'm weak, but because I knew my silence had power. My grandfather William once said, "Don't rush, Ethan. Let them think they've won, then beat them with the truth." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath. It felt like the first real breath of the day. My small office, with shelves full of files and an old wooden desk, suddenly became my only safe place. But I knew, somewhere in what my grandfather left, there was a way out, a way to reclaim what was mine. Claire, Harold, Margaret, they thought I was useless. They were wrong, and I'd prove it, not with words, but with actions. I drove through Seattle's rain-slick streets, streetlights blurring in the fog. After Claire's email, after how she and the Bennetts planned to erase me from Nexlify, I needed a place to breathe, to find myself. My grandfather William's old office, near Lake Washington, was the only place I could think of. The small wooden house, nestled among pines, stood outside time's flow. I parked by the rosebush he trimmed every weekend, walked up the steps, key cold in my hand. I almost feared the place had forgotten me. But the lock clicked, and the door opened. Inside, the air carried faint wood and tobacco, as if my grandfather still sat somewhere, muttering about markets and ethics. I walked through the hall, dim light from wall sconces, casting shadows on the floor. A grandfather clock stood in the corner, hands stopped since his death, reminding me time here belonged to the past. I turned left, entered the study untouched for years. Everything was the same: dusty bookshelves, old books with faded spines, a heavy oak desk under a tall window. I walked behind the desk, sat in his chair, felt its solidity, as if he were still here, watching me. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I needed a sign, something to hold on to in the storm. Claire and her family created. My fingers grazed the desk, touched the frame hanging behind. A painting of a farm under a gray sky, signed 1956. I remembered my grandfather pointing to it, when I was 12, saying some things only open at the right time. Ethan. I leaned down, felt behind the frame for the small brass button he'd shown me. It was still there. I pressed, heard a soft click. A hidden drawer slid out, revealing a gray cloth-covered wooden box. I opened the box slowly, heart pounding. Inside were two things: a slightly yellowed envelope, addressed to Ethan in his firm script, and a thick black document stamped family voting rights, restricted disclosure. I stared, hands trembling. The envelope added, "Open after your 47th birthday, not before." I'd passed my 47th a few months ago. This was his moment. I sat at the desk, opened the envelope, unfolded the letter inside. Not printed, but handwritten, black ink, sharp yet warm. Ethan, he wrote. If you're reading this, you're 47, and that means you're ready. Ready not because of age, but because of clarity, and clarity only comes after betrayal. I saw how they treated my old partner, Harold, when he asked questions. I saw silence become survival. I knew they'd come for you, when you're too smart, too steady, too indispensable. So I waited. So I didn't tell them what I'd arranged. You hold 70% of Nexlify's voting rights, activated automatically on your 47th birthday. The attached papers, legal, binding, irreversible. I stopped breathing, reread that line 4 times. You're not invisible, Ethan. You're the storm's eye. Stay calm, stay silent, let them think you're just a breeze. I set the letter down, fingers numb. This wasn't just protection, it was preparation. My grandfather had foreseen it all. Claire taking my credit, Margaret's dismissive looks, the email's firing plan. He'd given me the antidote. It came like a slow wave, not loud. I closed my eyes, breathed deep. The letter wasn't a goodbye, but a message for this moment. I opened the document, saw legal papers, his signature, notary seals. All real. I stood, sunlight slipping through the window, bathing the room in honey, deepening every shadow. I grabbed my phone, called James Larson, my grandfather's lawyer. He answered on the second ring. Ethan, he said, voice calm. I knew you'd call. It's time, I said. No nonsense. You've got 5 business days to prepare, he replied. No one suspects a thing. We ended the call. No extra words. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I turned back to the desk, picked up my company badge from my chest. The card with my name, Ethan Carter, Strategy Director. This time I wore it not to belong. I wore it to remind myself. The one they tried to erase is the one holding the pen. I sat in my small office at Nexlify, the laptop screen's light illuminating my face, highlighting the wrinkles of a 47-year-old too used to being overlooked. Claire's betrayal email still glowed on one tab, with its cold words, let him go quietly. But now, with the will granting me 70% of the company's voting rights, I was no longer the passive one. I knew I had to act, but not by storming into Claire's office to confront her. I would do as my grandfather taught, stay silent, prepare and defeat them with the truth. I started at night, when the executive floor was deserted, only the hum of the air conditioner lingering. I dug through archived folders on the company server, documents Claire and Harold thought were erased. There were distorted financial reports, with revenue inflated to polish Claire's profile for the media. There were internal emails where Claire instructed staff to remove my name from strategic projects, replacing it with hers. And there were buried HR complaints, from an intern forced to overwork to a manager, fired for refusing to falsify data. Each document was a piece, and I was building an undeniable picture. But I needed more. I needed witnesses, people who dared to speak the truth. I thought of Sarah Mitchell, a former marketing employee, who left Nexlify 6 months ago without explanation. She'd worked under me, smart, dedicated, but always tense when Claire was around. I found Sarah's number in an old contact list, sent a short text. Sarah, it's Ethan. Can we meet to talk? She replied instantly, her tone cautious. Cafe near Pike Place, tomorrow evening. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from a strange feeling, as if I were standing before a storm, and for the first time didn't want to run. The next evening, I arrived at the cafe near Pike Place, the scent of roasted coffee blending with Seattle's damp air. Sarah was already there, brown hair neatly tied, eyes wary. She seemed smaller than I remembered, as if Nexlify had drained part of her vitality. Ethan, she said, voice low, I know what you want. I have emails. She slid a USB across the table, fingers slightly trembling. Claire forced us to fudge numbers for last year's campaign. When I refused, she told me to quit, or she'd make sure I'd never work in Seattle again. I took the USB, feeling like I held a small bomb. Are you willing to testify? I asked. Sarah looked out the window, where rain fell lightly. "If you need me, I will," she said. "I left because I couldn't stand how they erased your name from everything you did." Her words hit like a knife, not because they hurt, but because they confirmed what I'd always suspected. I wasn't invisible, they just chose not to see. Back at the office, I worked with James Larson, my grandfather's lawyer. We met at a small diner near Lake Washington, where no one from Nexlify would go. James, with silver hair and sharp eyes, flipped through the documents I brought. Falsified reports, HR complaints, Sarah's emails. "You've got enough to turn the tables," he said, nodding slowly. "But you need the right moment. The company gala next week is your chance." I nodded, knowing he was right. The gala was Claire's stage, where she'd accept an award for my work. I'd let her bask in the spotlight before I stepped out. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly, organizing documents, checking every detail with James. But each night, as the laptop's glow faded, I faced myself. I thought of Claire, of the love that died between us. I wondered if confronting her would cost me the last piece of who I once was. The husband who loved her unconditionally. At times I wanted to delete the files, call Claire, beg for an explanation. But then I recalled her email, Margaret's smiley emoji, and my grandfather's letter. I wasn't doing this for revenge. I was doing it for justice. For me, for Sarah, for those trampled by the Bennetts. I opened the wooden box on my desk, took out my grandfather's letter, and reread it. "You are the storm's eye," he wrote. I closed my eyes, picturing him across from me, with his subtle smile and trusting gaze. He'd foreseen it all, and he'd given me the key. I put the letter away, pinned my company badge back on, Ethan Carter, Strategy Director. It was no longer a symbol of belonging. It was a reminder I was the one they tried to erase, but I'd be the one to rewrite the story. I didn't sleep much the nights before Nexlify's gala. Not from worry or excitement, but a strange calm, like watching a storm approach, and knowing I'd locked the doors, stocked the cellar. My grandfather William's letter, the will granting me 70% voting rights, and Sarah Mitchell's USB with proof of Claire's misconduct, all sat in the leather briefcase I carried to the Fairmont Hotel in downtown Seattle. I stepped out of the car, wearing a plain navy suit, no shine, just clean. The doorman nodded, his glance lingering on my company badge. Ethan Carter, Strategy Director. I arrived on time, passing clinking wine glasses and polite smiles. The reception table sat under a dazzling chandelier, a young woman checking a list on a tablet. "Hi," I said, voice soft. "Ethan Carter." She blinked, lips pursed. "Oh. We don't have your name confirmed," she said, hesitating. "Most people said you wouldn't show." Her words hung like a dud firecracker. She checked again, then pulled a name tag from under the table. "Department Liaison. No name, no title." "Sorry, sir," she said quietly. "There's a seat at table 11, behind the sound column." I nodded, stepped into the ballroom, shoes silent on red carpet. The chandelier gleamed like it was proud of itself. Tables draped in white roses and silver menus. Claire stood near the center table, posing for photos with two directors, her gold dress shimmering. Of course she wore gold. I found table 11, tucked behind a column, close enough to hear music, far enough to feel I didn't belong. My name tag was added hastily, handwritten, ink smudged. I ate little, nibbling salad, nodding politely, when someone tried small talk about quarterly forecasts. The lights dimmed, the stage lit up, the host's voice boomed. "Tonight, we honor the recipient of the Leadership Legacy Award, Claire Bennett." Applause roared, flashes popped, someone whistled. A large screen played a montage. Major campaigns, community programs, handshakes in boardrooms, smiling staff. Then I saw it, a photo from a project I led 3 years ago, the strategy that pulled Nexlify from crisis. But I wasn't in it. I remembered that moment. I stepped out to adjust a demo light. Just 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes erased me completely. Not an accident. Never an accident. I sat through the speech, the applause, the clinking glasses. I didn't clap. I didn't stand. I watched, studying the illusion Claire built. They wanted the world to believe she did it all, that I contributed nothing, but I held the blueprint. I left the gala early, unnoticed, as if I'd never been there. Monday, I arrived at the office early, company badge in hand. The elevator took me to the executive floor, but when I swiped my card at the security door, a red light blinked. Access denied. I tried again, still red. A new guard approached, saw my name on the badge, stiffened. Your card was updated Friday night, he said. Awkward. Friday night, when I sat behind a column at the gala, eating wilted salad and watching my work erased. They'd locked me out of the floor. I helped design. I didn't argue. I turned, walked out, headed to a small cafe near Pike Place, where I used to take Claire when we were in love. James Larson was waiting by the window, reading a paper like the world hadn't flipped. I sat, set my briefcase on the table, opened it to the documents. Falsified reports, HR complaints. Sarah's emails. I don't want revenge, I said, stirring tea, steam rising. I want to fix this. I want justice, not drama. James gave a dry smile. That's why your grandfather chose you, he said. We reviewed the plan, shareholder memo, announcement timing, disclosure sequence. I touched my company badge, still pinned to my chest, with the old belief that hard work would earn recognition. But that belief had faded, replaced by clarity. I didn't need an invitation to the table anymore. I had my own key. Tuesday morning, I reached James's office before the receptionist arrived. Seattle's sky was gray, clouds heavy, hesitating between rain and silence. I brought no one, just the briefcase, documents, and resolve, honed through sleepless nights. James greeted me with a nod. No extra words. He handed me a thick sheet, printed on cream, marked at the key section. Majority voting rights, activated under Clause 7B of the 2007 Trust. I took a pen, signed, hand steady. Don't announce yet, I said. Let them think nothing's changed. James tapped the calendar. Board meeting, 9 a.m., conference room. I nodded, left without another word. Outside, the wind picked up. Pedestrians hurried with coffee and gym bags, unaware power in a multi-million-dollar company had just shifted. I liked that. That night, I lay flat, watching ceiling shadows move like old regrets. I recalled Claire pulling me back after a meeting, saying, "Let me lead, you're not sharp enough." Or Margaret dismissing my ideas. "You're always quiet, that's your strength." I grabbed my phone to check the time, but a text from Harold popped up. "Heard you're asking questions. Drop it, you're not built for this fight." His words hit harder than I'd admit. For a moment, I was 12 again, quietly taking notes at my grandfather's table, drowned out by louder voices. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing without him. I touched the documents on my nightstand. HR complaints, falsified reports, Sarah's emails. My finger hovered over the laptop's delete key. Hesitating, but then a notification appeared. A voicemail from Sarah Mitchell. I sat up. Sarah had never spoken publicly. Not once. I played it. Her voice was calm but weary. "I know what Claire did to the interns. I have email copies. If you need my testimony, I'm ready." I listened twice. That was the moment I stopped doubting. My silence wasn't weakness. It was where I stored strength. And now, it was becoming strategy. Tuesday morning, I stood before the mirror longer than usual. Not adjusting, just looking at myself. Navy suit, hair neat, briefcase in hand, and a voice inside they'd never heard. I stepped into the elevator to the 21st floor, said nothing to the assistant, glancing warily. Through frosted glass, I heard Harold's voice, loud, confident. "Q4 revenue will exceed 12% if we stay on track." I pushed open the boardroom door. 12 pairs of eyes turned. Harold blinked. "Sorry, Ethan. This is a closed session, executives only." I walked to the head of the table, set my briefcase down slowly. "I'm not here as staff," I said, voice calm. "I'm here as majority shareholder." Silence broke like a glass falling. Some glanced at Harold. A board member chuckled nervously. I opened the briefcase, slid a notarized copy of the will across. Clause 7B, 2007 Trust. Effective on my 47th birthday. 70% voting rights. Signed, sealed. A woman in glasses started reading. Someone whispered, "Must be a mistake." I clasped my hands. "You can argue feelings," I said, "but not law." Harold tried to regain footing. "Ethan, this is irregular. No one was notified. That was the point." I cut in, voice sharp. I let silence sink into them. Then I handed over more documents. HR complaints, falsified reports. Claire's media figures inflated 300%. I pressed the phone speaker. A recording played. Harold's voice. "No one cares who Ethan is. Use his analytics. Put Claire's name on top. That's the image we need." The recording stopped. No one spoke. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here to fix this." I turned to the board chair, who once shook my grandfather's hand. Per bylaws, I moved to remove Claire Bennett and Harold Bennett from executive roles. Effective immediately. He looked at the documents, at me, then nodded. With majority shares, the motion passes. Harold froze, jaw clenched, scanning the room for objections. No one spoke. He gathered his papers, muttered something, and stormed out. Claire sat motionless, lips pressed tight, eyes burning as she stared at the table. She didn't speak. I didn't need her to. For the first time, they didn't look through me. They looked at me. The morning after the board meeting, I sat at the kitchen counter in my small apartment, a coffee mug cooling in my hand. I hadn't slept much, not from regret, but because the silence after power was heavier than I'd expected. Outside the window, Seattle's sky shifted from pale pink to blue, like an old photo fading. My apartment was simple, just a few bookshelves, an old guitar, and memories of a marriage that had died. After removing Claire and Harold, I felt a void, not failure, but the loneliness of someone who just reshaped a world. My phone buzzed, an email from the Seattle Times. Headline, "Secret Battle in Nexlify's Empire. Shareholder coup or legacy redefined." I blinked. I hadn't spoken to anyone, hadn't sent anything, but someone had. The article was front page, detailing my grandfather William's will, the power shift, and my role, Ethan Carter, the silent architect of reform. They didn't hold back. There were quotes from anonymous former employees. "If you worked with Ethan, you knew things ran smoothly because he was backstage, keeping it steady." I scrolled down, saw a gala photo of Claire radiant in the spotlight, with a small caption, "Project led by Ethan, uncredited." There were screenshots of HR complaints, distortions in Claire's campaigns. Someone had broken the dam, and the water was rising. Within an hour, the phrase "we worked with Ethan" started spreading on Reddit. I read the posts, fingers scrolling slowly. One wrote, "I was in marketing. We were told not to CC Ethan, even though the data came from his reports." Another, "He gave me my first internship, said I didn't need to be loud to matter. I quit because I couldn't stand how they erased him." The thanks didn't hurt, but the truth did. I'd been invisible in plain sight for years, and no one spoke up until now. I was still reading when my phone rang. Claire's name flashed. I answered, said nothing. "You humiliated us," she hissed, voice cracking like glass, sharp and disappointed. "I won awards. I was the face of this family. And you dragged our name through the mud to play victim." I didn't raise my voice. "You taught me to be silent," I said. "I just used it to dismantle what you built on lies." She paused, her breath catching. Then she hung up. An hour later, a text from Harold. "If your goal was to destroy the family's reputation, congratulations. No questions, no curiosity, just the familiar accusing tone, like armor he always wore." They didn't ask what the truth was. They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't want truth. They wanted control, disguised as legacy. I set the phone down, stared at the cold coffee. Their words no longer carried the weight they once did. I'd crossed the line they drew, and I wasn't going back. By afternoon, I returned to Nexlify's office. The hallway felt different. Not because of the stone floors, or the light from windows overlooking Puget Sound, but because of how people looked at me. They glanced up as I passed, not with fear, but with an awkward recognition. Some nodded, some held their gaze, longer than usual. Near the break room, a young employee, probably fresh from college, stood by the coffee machine. He looked like he wanted to melt into the floor, but as I passed, he stepped forward. "I just want to say thanks," he said. voice shaky. We thought no one would listen, especially someone in your position. I looked at him, said nothing, just nodded. For the first time, I realized power didn't isolate me. It only exposed those who never stood by me. The truth had spoken, through the article, through employees, through what I'd done. After the board meeting, Nexlify was no longer the same. Not because of the glass building overlooking Puget Sound, or the humming elevators, but because the air in the office had changed. As if the walls finally exhaled after years of holding their breath. Ethan Carter was no longer the quiet husband behind Claire. No longer the son-in-law, the Bennetts deemed expendable. I was the one holding 70% of the voting rights, and I chose to use it to build a place where no one would feel invisible, like I once did. I started by transforming the executive floor. The cold glass tables, glossy leather chairs, all were removed, replaced with warm oak, soft lighting, and a few green plants. I didn't want an office for show. I wanted a place to work, to listen. The main meeting room now had a large whiteboard, each week posing a question. What could be better? Employees, from engineers to HR, wrote answers in every style, from scribbles to neat script. Laughter in the break room was no longer forced. It was real, as if they no longer feared judgment. I held open meetings, inviting everyone, not just directors, but those who'd never spoken in a boardroom before. One day, I sat across from Sarah Mitchell, who'd given me the USB evidence at the Pike Place Cafe. She was back at Nexlify, working in marketing. We always had ideas, Sarah said, voice steady, but we thought they didn't matter. I looked around the table, saw faces that once bowed when Claire mocked me. They matter now, I said, then leaned back, letting the room breathe. I didn't talk much. I listened. Those meetings didn't just change the company, they changed me. I realized I didn't need to be the center, didn't need to be like Claire, with spotlights and awards. I just needed to be the one opening the door, letting other voices rise. But each night, back in my small apartment, I faced the void Claire left. I sat in an armchair, watching Puget Sound shimmer through the window, thinking of her, not today's Claire, but the Claire from the beginning. When we laughed under Seattle rain, when she believed I was enough. I took a cream sheet, wrote her a letter, not to send, just to close. We could have built together, Claire, if you hadn't tried to erase me. I folded it, tucked it in the desk drawer beside my grandfather William's wooden box. It wasn't a wound anymore. It was a boundary I set for peace, not punishment. I often returned to my grandfather's old office near Lake Washington, where I found the will. The wooden house stayed quiet, the tobacco scent fading, but his spirit lingered. I smiled, thinking he'd be pleased, not because I won, but because I chose to build instead of destroy. I brought a framed quote from his house to Nexlify's office. One he'd muttered when the board was chaotic. Respect isn't inherited, it's forged. I hung it in the meeting room, beside a new carved plaque. Listening first, titles later. I went back to work, but the old weight was gone. My office was simpler now. A plant, a comfortable chair, a bookshelf full of books employees borrowed and returned. I didn't hang degrees, or glowing articles. I didn't need them. What I needed was the office's air, honest breath, no longer afraid. I thought of my grandfather, how he left me not an empire, but a chance to choose better. Claire, Harold, Margaret, they called me useless, but I built the table they sat at, and now I built a new one, where everyone had a seat. I stood at the window, watching Puget Sound shift under the sunset. I was no longer the silent husband, no longer the scorned son-in-law. I was Ethan Carter, who turned silence into strength, not for glory, but for those forgotten, as I once was. One afternoon, a young employee knocked, holding an old framed photo. I found this in storage, she said, handing it to me. It was from the gala, when Claire won her award, me behind a column, name tag mislabeled, department liaison. I looked at myself, back hunched, trying to shrink. Should we take it down? She asked. I shook my head. Leave it there, I said. It reminds me not to let anyone stand in that place again. She nodded, eyes thoughtful, then gave me another frame, newer, from last week. Everyone in it smiled, shoulders touching. No one cut from the shot, just a moment, but alive. I walked with her down the hall, hung the new photo under a plaque we'd installed last month. Inside the frame was my old company badge, the card that flashed red when I was locked out of the executive floor. Below it, etched on smooth steel, "You never needed their permission to belong." I stepped back, letting that truth settle in my chest. I didn't need applause for what I'd done. I didn't need my name bigger, higher, because employees now walked into the office like they mattered. And that was all I wanted. I'd rewritten what power meant in that room, and I did it not for glory, but for people like me, those forgotten, called useless, who still stood up, quietly, and changed everything. The story of Ethan Carter and my wife, called me useless, and tried to fire me, till Grandpa's will made me boss. I stayed quiet, reflects the pressures and injustices in today's U.S. workplaces, where corporate culture often values superficial prestige over real substance. Ethan, a 47-year-old man, was belittled by his wife Claire and the Bennett family, called useless, and plotted against for firing. Despite being the backbone of Nexlify Technologies' success, this detail mirrors the reality in many American workplaces, where quiet contributors, like backstage staff or technicians, are often undervalued compared to flashy leaders. Ethan's erasure from a project at the gala, his access card being disabled, and being seated behind a pillar with a mislabeled name tag, highlight the lack of recognition and bias in modern tech companies, where image sometimes trumps competence. The lesson from Ethan's journey is the power of patience and silent preparation when facing injustice. Instead of exploding at Claire's humiliation, Ethan chose silence, gathered evidence, falsified reports, Sarah's emails, and used his grandfather's will to seize control. This teaches us that, in America's individualistic and competitive culture, staying calm and building a long-term strategy, like Ethan did with lawyer James, is often more effective than rash reactions. Moreover, Ethan's restructuring of Nexlify with a plaque reading, "Listening first, titles later," and keeping the gala photo to ensure no one else is overlooked, encourages us to foster fair workplaces where all contributions are valued. Be patient, prepare thoroughly, and stand up for justice, not for revenge, but to create lasting change. As Ethan did, subscribe to the channel to follow journeys of justice and hear stories like Ethan Carter's. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.